Hello and welcome back to another update. It's your host Weeb Union, and we're back with another update on the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. We start out to the north of Novomikhailivka, where the Russians have managed to make a 2 square kilometer advance north of the town, where they've managed to reach and get a foothold on the eastern outskirts of Dacha area north of Novomikhailivka. If the Russians manage to gain full control over the Dacha area to the north of the town, it'll only be a matter of time before the town itself falls into Russian hands. We're seeing that the fighting has completely dragged on to the western parts of the town and to the northern parts by the Dacha area, and with these developments it is likely that the Ukrainians will not be able to hold on to Novomikhailivka for much longer. There is a lack of Ukrainian fortifications in the area, which makes it difficult for them to actually hold on to the town. And now that they've reached the western parts of it, they also have a difficulty staying within it in large numbers, as they have a little territory that they're holding on to, and it is difficult for them to resupply, as we see with this strike here. That is a Russian FAB strike on the road between Novomikhailivka and Konstantinivka, as the Russians are heavily bombarding that to prevent any Ukrainians from moving through and resupplying Novomikhailivka. And with the roads here resupplying Novomikhailivka under fire by Russian airplanes, it makes it very difficult for them to resupply and send reinforcements to counterattack the Russian positions within the town, making it difficult for them to push them back or recapture parts of it. So with this, it is likely that we are entering into the final days of the Battle of Novomikhailivka, as Russians are heavily bombarding the town itself wherever the Ukrainian positions are positioned, where we actually see this footage here, which shows the first one is a Russian drone flying over a building somewhere across the front line, where it's trying to drop a grenade on one of the Ukrainian soldiers in the area, so the soldier hides inside the building, after which the drone coordinates an artillery strike on the building itself. So if the Ukrainian soldier leaves the building, he's hit by the drone with the grenade, and if he stays inside, he's hit by the artillery shot. So this is a strategy that is likely already being used by both sides, but it is one that definitely puts the coordination between drones and artillery to full use. Talking about FPV drones, we see this video here which shows a Russian soldier that detected one of these FPV drones by the Ukrainians. He shoots some sort of gun, it's either a shotgun or some sort of rifle, at the FPV drone, after which the drone is destroyed by the shooting. So while these FPV drones are extremely powerful and extremely useful, it's not all powerful. The Russian soldiers can still shoot them, and the Ukrainians likewise. There's also electronic warfare systems. However, so far none of these have been proven to be fairly reliable. At the same time, we see with the Russian advances to the north, they are pushing further along the roads, and with this they are likely looking to bypass Novomikhailivka to the north by gaining control over the roads and then pushing down to Pereskovivka here to the west of Novomikhailivka. Slightly further north here in the direction of Pobieda, there's been no Russian advance since the 11th of March. However, we do see some positional fighting taking place here to the north. The Ukrainians have positions by the fortifications to the north of Pobieda, which the Russians are doing some positional fighting, trying to hit the Ukrainian positions, and the Ukrainians are trying to launch counterattacks to push the Russians out of Pobieda, out of the heights in the area, and weaken the positions here. So we're seeing positional fighting taking place by Pobieda, but no offensive by either side. Moving further north, we see here in the direction of the north of Pervomaiske, west of Tonenka, further Russian advances, and they have now gained a foothold in the set of fortifications the Ukrainians have to the north of Pervomaiske. They've also advanced further towards the Ukrainian fortifications by Umanske, and with this the Russian offensive west of Avdiivka develops further in a northwestern direction. To the south of that, we see to the north of Pervomaiske some positional fighting where a Ukrainian infantry fighting vehicle was shot while rotating from these armored and fortified positions and down towards Pervomaiske. It seems that the Ukrainians are attempting to reinforce the area after the recent Russian breakthrough within the town, but they are getting hit in the process. They're getting hit on the way there. It is easy for the Russians and the Ukrainians to detect the movement of the other side's reinforcements and supplies due to the spring season still being fairly muddy. Despite the lack of rain this specific spring season, we see that the roads are the ones being used for the resupply and movement of armored vehicles, and therefore, as long as there's UAV coverage over these roads, it is easy for either side to detect movement of armored vehicles and other supplies. So with that, we see that there's a lot of hits on moving targets while they try to reposition themselves to hold or attack different positions across the front. To the northwest of Orlivka, there's been a small advance by the Russians, and they're now face to face against the Ukrainian fortifications in the southern parts of Semenivka. The battle of these fortifications has started, as well as the foothold south of Semenivka. If the Russians manage to succeed with that, they'll be able to contest the supply line here to the west of Semenivka, significantly weakening the Ukrainian positions by Berdishi and Semenivka. The Russians are now having a foothold in the southern parts of Semenivka and control over half of Berdishi, which means that the Ukrainian positions here on the second line of defense are numbered. If the Ukrainians lose Berdishi and Semenivka, it will create a large area of open fields to the north of these positions, which means it will be difficult for either side to advance further from those positions. After which we'll see some positional fighting like west of Tonenke, where the Russians are inching forwards through the fields. We also see that Umansky itself is isolated from all other areas or populated areas, which means that the Russians will likely be focusing and concentrating their forces there, while the Ukrainians would have a difficult time pushing through the open fields to reach the Russian positions due to heavy Russian artillery. And with that, we see that the positional fighting will continue in the direction of Berdishi and Semenivka, where the Russians will look to gain control over both of these villages before it moves on to the direction of Umansky, Yasnobrodivka, and Nitailova here to the west of Avdiivka. The month of March following the month of February have been 2 months with significant Russian advances west of Avdiivka in the direction of Novomikhailivka, Krasnodarivka, west of Marinka, and in the Pervomaysk-Nevelsky area. With the Russian capture of multiple villages and continuously pushing across the front, despite the Ukrainian efforts and reinforcements to hold the lines, we see that the fighting is not slowing down at all. Instead, we'll likely see an intensification of the fighting across the front line. We see here in the direction of Berdishi, the Russians are testing a new weapon where there is this drone unmanned armored vehicle driving through the southern road here in Berdishi. It was firing and testing towards Ukrainian positions, after which it was hit by 3 separate Ukrainian FPV drones before it was disabled. And with this, we may be seeing a new era of technology in the wars where AI is helping guide these robots to detect targets and enable them to operate armored vehicles from afar. This is a significant development in the state of war, as we may see fighting go further away from human casualties and more to these developed weapons. Meanwhile, the Russian missile campaign continues across all of Ukraine. We also see today or tonight that Odessa was left in the dark after further hits on further energy plants. And with this, we see increasing amounts of strikes on Ukrainian significant infrastructure that are boosting the Ukrainian military industry, and continuous strikes on these positions could completely halt the Ukrainian production of drones, for example. We are seeing the continuous strikes on these Ukrainian positions as well as their air defense, which, if that was destroyed, could leave the Russians with complete air supremacy, allowing them to launch an offensive with close air support. So there are massive changes happening right now to the front, where the Russians are hitting the back heavily with these missile strikes and drone swarms, where up to 40 or 50 drones launch every night, followed by these missile strikes, at the same time as the fighting happens across the front with heavy bombardment by Russian artillery across the front, where Western estimates estimate that Russia is producing 3 million shells a year, while they also estimate that they will be importing 1 million shells from North Korea a year, which adds up to 4 million, while Ukraine is struggling to receive 1 million combined from all of its Western partners. So we're seeing that the Russian artillery advantage and missile advantage and all of these material advantages are going to continue even if the West provides all the aid that they've been doing so far. But yet again, the US is not sending any new aid since October of last year, which leaves Ukraine in this very difficult position. It was already said that if the Ukrainians did not receive another aid package from the US by the end of March, which today, as I'm recording this, it's 4 a.m. on the 31st of March, which means Ukraine is going to be in a very, very, very difficult position now that it is not receiving any additional aid, despite how much it complains to Western media and how many interviews they go for and also on. They're continuously struggling to hold their current positions, and the whole thing is just becoming more and more difficult every day that passes by for Ukraine, and Russia has a significant advantage right now that they haven't really had throughout this whole